pa pa eya eya, pa 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 eya, pa 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 eya eya. Hello everyone, I'm Wendy Liebmann, CEO and Chief Shopper at WSL Strategic Retail, and this is Future Shop. My guest today is actually a return guest, Michael Clinton. Michael Clinton, who you all know, has had an illustrious career in publishing and media. A number of years ago, he'll remind me when, I think it was 4 or 5, he started a whole new venture, which was called Raw Forward, which was a content platform that inspires people to raw forward into the second half of their life. And with that came a new book called Raw Forward, which many of us have read. He is also right on the precipice this evening, at least the evening that we're recording this, about to launch his next book called Longevity Nation. So this is very exciting. Michael, thank you for joining me again. Welcome back to Future Show.
Wendy, thank you. That was such a nice introduction. It's so great to be with you. As always, we've known each other for a long time, so it's always great to reconnect. I'm coming to you from the Hearst Tower on 57th and 8th, where I have my Raw Forward office, which we can talk about. But thanks for having me.
Before I start my conversation with Michael Clinton, just a reminder, as always, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. Go to anywhere you get your podcasts, Spotify, Apple, our website. Just click subscribe. Doesn't cost you anything. We just like to know you're there, and it makes us look even better than we do now. So thank you for that. Now on to my interview with Michael. It's a pleasure to have you back. For everybody who didn't hear the first podcast I did with Michael when he published Raw Forward, Michael is not only somebody who has spent much of his life in the media business in illustrious roles, but he's also a mountain climber. He's climbed all the highest peaks in the world, including the one near where I grew up in the bush called Mount Kosciuszko. Not so high, only 7,000 feet, but high enough in Australia, land of flatness. He has traveled all around the world. He is a renowned photographer, published books. He is a Renaissance man who has roared into the second half of his life. Great inspiration. So lovely to have you back and to talk about all the new news. So the topic of the day seems to be longevity, and you were very prescient or forward in your focus on the second half of life, but also living a long, healthy life. And so, when you use the term longevity, how do you define that? Lots of people have lots of different ways of defining it.
It's a great question. And certainly it has hit the global conversation and the global zeitgeist. You see the word longevity everywhere now. And I think that it's a great concept, because what it really is that life expectancies are getting longer. People are healthier. I'm on the Stanford University Center on Longevity board, and, a lot of the science there and other places is today's 5-year-old is going to live to be 50% chance to live to be 100. Mm-hmm. So, there's this new awareness that if you are 50 and healthy, you may live another 30, 40 years, which is a complete rewrite of the second half of life script. Yeah. Now, everyone says, okay, are you saying everyone's going to live to be 100? No. But what I'm saying is, as we live longer lives, longevity means healthier, better quality, manifested through new developments in medicine and technology and AI, and we can talk all about that. But it is really about living the longest life possible in the healthiest way, mind, body, spirit, and financial well-being as well. Yeah. So anyway, yes, a holistic view. View.
It's interesting because, as you know, we've been conducting our How America Shops research for many years, and speaking of longevity, and in the most recent study that we have just published, literally, we tracked how people are defining longevity, and it's been interesting to watch that, quality of life, healthiness, sharp mind, community, and the different attributes as people that we've had to add, because as people think about this and even think about it as possible, the many different ways they're thinking about it, including, as you said, financial, which of course becomes a big issue for many of us who plan Social Security at 65 and maybe we'll live for another 10 years. Okay, we could do it. And then you're like, 30 years, 40 years. Exactly. Now what? I'm going to be back at my, Walmart job or my working
Right.
at Pizza Hut, which is where I
Right.
got started. So
And,
anyway.
it's great because, when I give keynotes all over the world now. I've
Hmm.
done about 25 keynotes last year. I'm on my
Right.
way in July to Hong Kong and Taipei. We're going to be doing a longevity summit there. And when I speak to audiences, I always ask in the audience, how many of you would like to live to be 100? And I get about half the hands.
Oh.
And then I ask, how many of you would like to live to be 100 if you were mobile and cognizant and had all your brain power and your health? And all the hands go up.
Right.
And so my message is, well, are you ready for the 100-year
Right.
life? Or are you ready for a 90-year life in all of its various forms? So, yeah, it's very much, as you said, the aha for a lot of people who are saying, gee, I better think about this in the context of my own personal life.
Yeah, and that planning. I mean, I must say, I marvel. You read the obituaries. I guess you get to a certain age, you read the obituaries, but you read the New York Times obituaries. Excuse my bias. And when you do, you see more and more people who are in their 90s and their hundreds. Somebody dies at 74, and you go, "Oh my God, that's
Right.
young."
Yeah.
Where, of course, what was it used to be, 70, or is that the Gettysburg Address? Something. Anyway, whatever
yeah,
that was.
I think you raised a great point. 100 years ago,
Mhm.
only 100 years ago,
Mhm.
1935, when Social
Mhm.
Security was launched and the quote word retirement was launched, because most people prior to that worked until they died, right?
Mhm.
There was no such thing. But the average life expectancy was 62.
Mhm.
And there were 7.8 million people who were 65 or older in the United States.
Mhm.
Today, there are 60 million, growing to 80 million in the next
Mhm.
decade. And this idea of, 60s, 70s, and particularly even early 80s, the first boomers turn 80 this
Mhm.
year. You look around and see some of these 80-year-old boomers, they're phenomenal in terms of, fit and active and engaged and doing all sorts of things.
Mhm.
They're the new role models that are taking place live as we rewrite what it's all going to look like. So
Mhm.
yeah, so 74 feels more like middle age, midlife.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I had that conversation with somebody the other day who asked me if I'd had a midlife crisis because I changed my hair color to white. Thank you, Annie Lennox. And I thought, oh my God, I don't think this is midlife. I think that would be really interesting, and I'd definitely be in the Guinness Book of Records. But anyway, that aside. So how did the new book, Longevity Nation, which I do have on pre-order, hopefully it'll show up next week, right? It's out next week, right? The 5th,
Yeah.
please
Mhm.
push. Please
Yes.
promote. You can find it on Amazon and other places. So how did that evolve out of Raw Forward and that work you've been doing? Is that for 5 years now? How long ago did you begin
Well,
the
the
movement of
book
Raw Forward?
the book Roar was written
Raw,
5 years
sorry.
ago, and
Yeah.
the business Roar Forward
Uh-huh.
launched about 3+ years
Uh-huh.
ago. So Roar Forward was launched as we work with about 40 different companies,
Uh-huh.
many companies in beauty and fashion,
Uh-huh.
but many other divisions. We work with C-suite leadership on informing them about all things longevity. And, as I was on this journey, I kept meeting all these amazing people who were doing incredible work in medicine and technology
Uh-huh.
and higher education and travel and skin longevity and so many
Uh-huh.
places that I thought, these are the longevity innovators, the people who are really creating the future. So I thought, I would love to raise their voices and put them, right. A lot of the voices that were heard in 1.0 were, the tech bros who all wanted to like
Uh-huh.
live forever and, spending a lot of money and all that kind of stuff. And
Uh-huh.
there are a lot of other voices, and there are a lot of women's voices that I wanted to
Uh-huh.
raise,
Uh-huh.
intentionally in the book. So I started interviewing people. I interviewed about 70 people
Uh-huh.
from all aspects of longevity. I call this the survey course on longevity. It is really, remember in school when you did
Yep.
Psychology 101 and you learned all about psychology? To me, this is what's the global landscape look like on the longevity front now? And hence the word Longevity Nation sort of came to me and will be in hardcover and Audible
Uh-huh.
and Kindle for all
Uh-huh.
ways you want to read it. But it was a great blessing and gift to talk to so many incredible people who are doing such amazing work to help us all live longer and better, which
Uh-huh.
is really the goal.
Yeah. Yeah. So the work you do with Stanford,
Hmm.
explain that
Yep.
work, because I followed you and some of the work and obviously the researchers in that program. Tell our listeners
Yeah.
about that program.
Yeah. So the Stanford Center on Longevity
Mm-hmm.
was founded around 2007 by Dr. Laura Karstensen,
Mm-hmm.
who actually wrote the foreword to Longevity Nation,
Mm-hmm.
which was I was very honored. And she's one of the OGs of longevity. She was a psychologist, but she really started this exploration of how we were all living longer and what it all meant. And they do a lot of research on this front. A few years ago, they published a document called The New Map of Life.
Mm-hmm.
It was written by 9 postdoctoral fellows across different functions, everything from economics to psychology to medicine, which was really a template for how we're going to think about the second half. So
Mm-hmm.
today's younger professionals are going to have 60-year careers
Mm-hmm.
versus my generation, which had a 40-year career. They may have 2 or 3 careers. They may not be as linear as we were in our careers. There's going to be restructuring, institutional restructuring that's going to have to come along with businesses and companies as they think about talent. And, one of the great examples is in the beauty space, which is L'Oreal, which has a great
Mm-hmm.
program called L'Oreal for All Generations, where they're very intentional about their 50-plus-year-old employee, but also companies rethinking how they market to this group because the youth culture, which was created for the boomers, as those generations have moved into second half of life and you've got the Xers, and I always love to tell, and there's a gasp in the room when I say the first millennials turn 50 in 4 years,
Mm-hmm.
right? That is a huge cohort. How are brands and companies and retailers and businesses rethinking the 50 plus market
Yeah.
as a growth market versus they're phasing out? This group is not brand loyal anymore. They have a lot of
No.
money to spend and they shouldn't be ignored by brands. So
Yeah.
the Stanford Center on Longevity does a lot of work that amplifies that, brings research to it. Estee Lauder, we work with them globally, and they have a big project. They have funded a couple of big research projects with the Stanford Center, really it's not about product, it's about the aesthetics of what is self-perceptions, what are the
Mm-hmm.
psychologies as we live longer, and what will that mean, especially to future generations. So the center
Yeah.
is a really interesting place. Yeah.
Yeah. And I do think, you hit upon this that yes, aesthetics obviously important to all of us, but also the economic, the psychological, as well as the most obvious, the physical side of things. That really does talk to how we need to think and restructure the way we build our institutions, whether it's work, whether it's, pleasure, whether it's medical, all of those things. When you look around the world with all the work you've done, is there a country or companies who are leading the way in this work, or is everybody just getting started in all of
Yeah.
this?
The beacon of all of this is in Asia. I always say to people, go to Singapore. It's a
Right.
microcosm of how it's being done right.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm just back from Japan and Korea, and life expectancies there are much older than in the U.S. and even in
Mm-hmm.
the EU. Asian women in Korea and Japan and Hong Kong are are seeing average life expectancies late 80s, hitting
Mm-hmm.
90. As you know, there are a lot of centenarians in those cultures.
Mm-hmm.
But what ha- what has happened in Asia? First of all, there's a completely different cultural mindset about people who are living longer. There's a much
Yeah.
bigger level of respect and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
But government policy, public-private partnerships, brands in retail, urban planning and infrastructure
Mm-hmm.
have all really they've done amazing work in those countries to retrofit what the countries are going to look like with
Yeah.
older populations. And I write about this in the book
Yeah.
and went to Singapore and did some amazing interviews there. So I say they're the ones who are leading the charge. EU, a bit behind, but better
Mm-hmm.
than the US. The US is still a bit blind to all of this.
Mm-hmm.
But the tsunami is here in terms of the number of people. I mean, you heard the stats earlier. So the US is going to have to really adopt and adapt quickly to this group.
Let me just take a moment to pause in the middle of my great discussion with Michael. I just want to invite you to our upcoming Women's Wellness Symposium. It's an event we hold every 2 years on the subject of health. This one's called The Next Revolution. It's June 25th in New York City at the beautiful Pier 61. This is a day-long event where we will talk about both the challenges and opportunities around women's health and wellness in the coming years. Love to have you there. It's going to be a great event with speakers from Walmart and Ulta, Mecca in Australia, Holland & Barrett coming from London. Just a great audience of speakers, many more than that. Go to our website for more information, www.wslstrategicretail.com, and you can get that information. You can register and come join us. It's called The Next Revolution because there's a lot of work still to be done. So come join us at the revolution. Now back to my conversation with Michael. It's interesting for in this country, certainly, where something like Social Security was supposed to help people through these latter years, not to discuss the chaos that we live in these days, although we could. I know we could have a long conversation on that, but that economic security and theoretically younger people putting into Social Security, helping older people or enabling older people to receive their Social Security payments, that whole structure does require some real tough thinking on the part of, I would say, our governments. I don't know is it public institutions that you're seeing that are doing more work in this country and in other places, or companies like the Estee Lauders, L'Oreal's of the world, or, others in the home, travel, other industries that you work in? Who's doing something here or leading the way?
Right. Well, let's first talk about financial well-being. And we do have a chapter in the book. I interviewed the former deputy commissioner of Social Security. And, it was really a lot of insightful information around that. But it was meant to augment your income, not be your income. And more people are relying on that for your income. And we need Social Security reform, but Washington doesn't want to touch it. But the bigger issue is that we need to integrate financial literacy into our schools or into our living, the way we have health well-being. In Denmark, which to me is the poster child country, their kids in school learn financial literacy throughout their early school years. So they learn about savings and compound interest and short-term, medium-term, long-term, all of those things. They have a different kind of scheme than Social Security, but we're really bad at that here. And that becomes school systems and others who step in. But on the business front, if you look at various sectors, I mentioned what Lauder and L'Oreal are doing. There are, I'll just pick a travel company. If you're familiar with Backroads, which is the hiking, cycling company. I interviewed the founder, Tom Hale, for the book. What he says, which is so interesting, is that his consumers now, the people who do the Backroads, some of them are in their 70s and 80s, and they still want the Backroads experience, but it might be a combination of regular bicycles and e-bikes. And they just started a new program called Dolce Tempo, a slower pace, so that you're not racing through one day to the next. He also said that one of the most successful programs that they just introduced was solo women's travel for women 60 and over. And, a lot of women who might be single or divorced or widowed who want to have an experience can now tap into Backroads. So I think and by the way, if you look at all of their marketing materials and you go online and you look at their catalogs, what they're so brilliant at is integrating people of all ages into their imagery. So you see people in their 20s and then in their 70s and in their 50s, and they're all doing active things. And it's very organic, and their marketing and advertising and branding is spot on for what's happening in this whole longevity phenomenon. So that's a good example in the travel space.
That's great. It feels it's inclusive and that sense of, also we saw in our research, sense of community. Do I have a community that I can participate with at whatever age or whatever interest was the other piece that popped up in our work. When we last talked with RAW and then the RAW Forward initiatives, we talked about, who was getting it right, retailers. When I think about some of our listeners in the CPG space, food, beverage, beauty, all of that, health, obviously, but fashion across the retail board of all types of retail, we both agreed a little bit was going on, but not a ton. Well, how are you seeing that today? And then what's your anticipation from a an everyday CPG retail space
Yeah.
when we think about all
Well,
of this new work you're doing?
yeah, it's a great question. So we track now what we identify as the top 12 ad campaigns of the year that
Hmm.
speak to the longevity phenomena, because words, images, messaging in a contemporary kind of way. And people can go on to roarforward.com and see the campaigns
Hmm.
that we've selected. And some of them are in the US, some are in Europe, some are in Asia, and the brands who are doing it right with that. And one of the great examples is Prudential Finance, where they have a woman whose name is Karen, who is quote unquote going to retire from her first career. But she says, I'm far from done. I'm going to do this and this
Hmm.
and this and this. And she's got a whole sort of portfolio of things that she wants to do. That's the sensibility and the messaging, which was a good example. Back to Estee Lauder, they launched a campaign in Europe called Because of My Age, which was very pro-age. They had the former Prime Minister of Denmark in the campaign. That campaign then ran across the EU and ultimately the US. As you know, they just brought Paulina Borzakova back as a brand
Hmm.
ambassador. So good example of a brand who is doing it. In Europe, H&M is doing a really great job of their imagery. Sephora is doing a great job in their imagery. Very, once again, organic, inclusive, not forced. And I think what has been really good to see, as you know this, on the fashion runways in the last few seasons, they've had more
Hmm.
multi-generational women, mostly in the women's shows, not so much in the men's
Hmm.
yet,
Not so
in
much.
the women's
Mm.
shows. And you saw the big piece in the New York Times that Vanessa
Hmm.
wrote, oh, fashion people are finally paying attention to women over 50, who, by the way,
Yeah.
have all the money, have
Mm.
have the style sensibility, and don't relate to a 25-year-old influencer. They want to
Yeah.
see other women like them, right? So you're
Yeah.
seeing some great sprouts
Mm.
happening across.
Yeah. Yeah. You've raised have the money to spend. One of the things, and we recently, the very voluble, is that a word? Scott Galloway wrote a piece about the affordability of longevity. Does this feel like haves and have nots? Are we talking a K-shaped longevity? Because there are a lot of people who are just struggling to put the meals on the table. How do we have to think about money as being a principal key right this moment to living a longer life?
Well, I love how Scott and everybody else is getting on the longevity bandwagon
Mm.
because
Of
you know,
course.
the hot
Kara Swisher, I mean, come on, you've led the way yet again.
they're dipping in, but what they
Hmm.
don't have is the long longitudinal
Yeah,
gravitas that
yeah,
Laura Karstensen has, or
yeah.
Dr. Linda Fried, Columbia, who
Hmm.
who really tackle these in a very deep, deep kind of way. So all good for Scott and Kara and everybody else to be in on it. But let me start first with, before we get to the actual affordability cost thing, is there are a lot of fundamentals that anyone of any socioeconomic background can partake in. And that is that your own personal longevity is more in your hands than you think. Your genetics are only 25% of your personal longevity. Now, there's been a new study that says, well, maybe it's more, but I've done some research with epidemiologists who still stand behind the 25% number. Because, you have one study that pops up. It's kind of like, eat meat, don't eat meat, eat sugar, don't eat sugar. Oh, so,
Don't go there.
so
Do not go there
don't
today.
so the 25% seems to be a good number. And
Hmm.
what that means is, movement and exercise, how we eat, our sleep patterns, our relationships, everyone can partake in creating a better personal longevity strategy. So we got to start there, because that makes you a healthier human being. And when you're a healthier human being, the affordability factor, there are less healthcare costs, there are less
Hmm.
medical costs, many of the things that come with living longer. And I write about some really interesting people in the book in the academic world, who have studies that take sedentary people in their 70s, putting them on a light exercise diet and watching their health metrics improve dramatically. And, when you think about the GLP-1, which is the miracle drug
Hmm.
of our generation, it's now going to be on Medicare starting
Yeah.
in July. Prices are going to be half price starting in January. It's becoming a democratized drug for
Mm.
healthy well-being. So your affordability of your health care gets recalibrated when you take care of yourself in very
Yeah.
fundamental kind of ways. Then you get into the other affordability discussions of, housing and food and all of those kinds of things. And certainly that was always been a phenomena of the haves and the have-nots. And how do we, as a country, we're less, how do I put it, generous. Once again, when you go to Asia, there's there are more social infrastructures, government structures that help people who are living longer, and we don't have that here.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the awareness factor, as people become more and more aware of this, younger people in their 30s,
Mm-hmm.
40s, 50s become more aware of this. They're going
Yeah.
to realize that they're going to have to work longer, save
Yeah.
more, become part of a 401k plan, have a financial plan. For those, you said it earlier, for those who were from a different generation who were like, well, I'll sort of kick into Social Security. And then there
Mm-hmm.
was a lot of fuzzy, like, how much more longer are you going to live?
Yeah.
Now, if you're going to live another 30 years, that group is going to have a bit of a hard time playing catch up. But the next
Yeah.
generations are going to have a different approach. So
I also
anyway,
think
yeah,
within that you talked about millennials and, the oldest. I think about Gen Z, and the oldest is 30, I think. And these people are going to have to take care of some of those other people. So to your point, the awareness of what do I need to do not to be in that
right.
position, or
That's
what's the learning that I can build because I've got these people in my life still, whether they're
yeah,
neighbors or family or all of that. I mean, when we looked at, again, in our latest work, people reported that 30% of the national sample that we do say they are taking care of somebody other than their immediate family
right,
in the house.
right.
So that whole notion of it's
Yeah,
not just I have to figure out how to do that, particularly as people live longer, but hopefully that is also a reflection to say, gee, who's going to take care of me? And
yeah,
or how do I take control and do some of these things? I appreciated your comment about the cost of living longer is often generated by the cost of not living as well or as healthy as you might, even in mentally, socially, as well as physically
yeah,
in later years when, the
yeah,
illness does that. Just
yeah.
as we start to wrap up here, some of the breakthroughs that you're seeing either through Stanford or the other universities that you're aligned with around the world, what are some of the medical, you talked about GLP-1s, which are, of course, reputed not only about weight and diabetes, but to have other potential benefits as
Yeah.
further research is done. Are there other things that you are seeing as you spend time with the medical profession or the psychological, whomever?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. We're at an incredible moment. Once again, a lot of it's going to be enabled by AI, which is the
Mm-hmm.
good side story of AI.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of drug development, fast-paced drug development.
Mm-hmm.
There are two FDA-approved drugs to slow down Alzheimer's,
Mm-hmm.
but there are 140 different drugs in the pipeline, which will be fast-tracked, hopefully, through MNRA and through
Mm-hmm.
AI,
Mm-hmm.
which is going to bring a lot of different solutions. You may have caught the story about what's happening in the cellular rejuvenation
Mm-hmm.
space. That means that there will be treatments, drugs that will slow down the aging process at the
Mm-hmm.
cellular level. There's no cure for aging, and aging brings a lot of diseases in the later years. But if you
Mm-hmm.
slow down the aging process, that all gets pushed out,
Mm.
and that will lead to better, longer lives. A lot happening on the metformin front, with metformin also being a potential longevity drug. Precision medicine, how you'll be treated versus how I will be treated. I write a lot for Men's Health on this topic and
Mhm.
Esquire, and people can go on to our website,
Yeah.
roarforward.com, and see some of the stories.
Mhm.
But yeah, it is those things. The key, Wendy, is that all of these developments have to be democratized and come
Yeah.
down the pyramid so that
Mm.
everyone has access to them. And I think if you look at the history of innovation, it always starts sort of at the top of the pyramid.
Mm.
I think about the first families who had televisions. They were like the wealthy people down the street. My
Right.
father was Well, we'd all go down the street and watch the
That's it. I
TV.
remember that one. Go across the road to that neighbor to watch something. Right.
Telephones,
Right.
innovations, laptops, it always
Hmm.
move down the pyramid. And we
Hmm.
have to make sure that all of these longevity drugs and treatments and diagnostics are available to every person. And I think what I loved about interviewing everyone for the book is that's their mission.
Yeah.
Their mission is to bring democratization to longevity care. And I love that. So
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of promise. I think there's a lot of promise.
Yeah, well, as you know, unfortunately, you're going to be on your book tour to 5 billion countries, so I appreciate that. But as you know, we are doing our biannual women's, well, normally it's a health symposium. This is focused on women's health and wellness called the Next Revolution. And I always say, where goes women's health goes everybody's health, right? Because we are the caregivers and the people who tend to live longer. If you guys could
True,
just catch up, it would be
true,
really good. We could use some
true.
help. Hurry up, climb more mountains, do something. But within that space, we will obviously talk about, we will miss you, but we will talk about some of the work that's
Yeah,
going on in that space. And it's interesting because we have somebody talking about financial health. We have somebody talking about where investing is going in the private equity markets, things like that. So we're trying to do beyond the science, which we will include. My hope is here that we, in this conversation, yours and sharing it, for pushing it, roaring it forward, which seems most appropriate, is that it doesn't become just a sort of greenwashed, if you will, word, and that we really do, with the work you're doing in the and the medical communities and the consumer communities, which obviously can touch lots of people, and the
yeah,
retail communities, that we really do see the implications of that. Just seeing older people on the floor at, Walmart and Costco and
yeah. No,
CVS
no,
and all of those places is great.
there's, as you know, we publish Women's Health magazine,
Uh-huh,
and
uh-huh,
I've been the publishing director of that and Men's
uh-huh,
Health for many, many years. And what is astounding to me is the funding on women's health initiatives is completely lopsided
yeah,
versus men's, and you
yeah,
know that. And
yeah.
there needs to be a rethink. I interviewed a lot of women doctors for the book who talk about some really unique things. Dr. Jennifer Garrison, who was with the Buck Institute, who has
Mm-hmm,
she's up for the X Prize, Women's Health X Prize. I mean, they're
uh-huh,
doing just incredible work. But I do want to, mention one thing you said. It is true that women live 5 to 6 years longer than men. No one's really put their finger on why
mm,
that is. I mean, there's a lot of different research and speculations on that. But the one thing which I think has a lot of relevance for your audience and who you work with is over the next 10, 20 years, there will be the generational transfer of wealth.
mm,
That will be the largest generational transfer of wealth in the history of the world. And granted, have and have nots, but the primary recipients of that wealth transfer in phase one will be women.
mm,
They will be the spouses if they're in a traditional marriage. They will be the partners. They will be and obviously many of those women earn their own incomes.
uh-huh,
But this is only going to underscore the growing economic power that women will have writ
mm,
large in the marketplace, and that's
yeah,
global, by the way.
yeah,
So
yeah,
paying attention to those women who are over 50 is pretty important, I would say.
yeah. And
Pretty
as a
important.
last thought on that, thank you for opening that door before we,
Yeah,
as we say,
yeah,
you know, welcome to the revolution. Is one of the things we've seen in this last piece of work we've done is, with all the new things that are going on, all the new products on the shelf, et cetera, that people are getting overwhelmed and starting to feel either the need to push back or underserved. Women are the group in that's broadest, not, across generations, but women are the ones who are saying, whoa, way too much, guys. You're making this way too complicated with everything else we have to do. So that's
yeah,
also going to be another interesting tension as
yeah,
they start to think about health and wellness in,
yeah.
in even more practical, maybe pragmatic ways that they need to deal with it and take some control in this crazy world. So
Great
as
point.
always, thank you so much for joining. It's exciting to watch your evolution revolution through all of this. I'm really excited to read the book. I got a little preview, but I'm very excited to read the book when it lands on my doorstep on Monday, I think.
Yeah.
So
That's coming any minute. So we're
yes,
excited. So thank you, Wendy. It's always great to you. I'm sorry I can't be with you in person this year, but as you know, I'm on a global tour. So
I
I'll be
do.
Europe and Asia and the
Yeah.
US. And I'm excited to be the advocate for this story and this mission. So thanks for having me talk about it.
We will be following you on Instagram and everywhere else. So it's exciting. We will LinkedIn, Insta, Michael's everywhere. So we'll be following you and the team and all of that. And everybody do go to Michael's website at Raw, because there is so much there that is of value in just the practical and inspirational ways of thinking about the future and the opportunity with this growing cohort, as they say, of people roaring forward. So again, good luck. Have great, safe travels, and look forward to seeing you in the future. Thanks, Michael. Cheers for now.